Hi, my name is Holland Perryman, and I am a student intern for the Pat Conroy Literary Center. Welcome back to our 5th annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival, presented in partnership with ETV Lowcountry and the University of South Carolina, Beaufort. We are so grateful for these partnerships and for the generous support of the estate of Robert S. Handler, which makes possible our festival's many free programs like this one. Thank you to everyone joining us live through Zoom. If you are with us in the festival Zoom room, you can leave your questions and your comments for our presenters in the chat. Please also check the chat for a link for our online festival bookstore. And if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, please check the comments for that bookstore link as well. Each year, our festival features a session highlighting the work of some of our local writers. This year, we are honored to host, from right here in Beaufort County, memoirist and travel writer Donna Keel Armer, novelist and children's author Dwight Bruff, and editor and children's author Susan Diamond Riley. Also joining us all the way from Florida is debut novelist Jo Palmer, who has attended all of our previous festivals. Dwight Bruff will also be moderating our panel discussion. She is the author of the historical novel Trouble the Water, about the inspirational life of Robert Smalls, an enslaved man from Beaufort who became a Civil War hero and later a U.S. congressman. A volunteer at our local nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center, Dr. Bruff earned her bachelor's degree in education at Texas A&M and a master's and doctorate in theology at Southern Methodist University. In 2017, she was a scholarship recipient for the prestigious Key West Literary Seminar. Let's welcome Becky Bruff and our panel of writers.
Thank you, Holland. And thank you to Jonathan Huff, the director of the Conroy Center, and the board and the volunteers for making this year's festival happen in a very unusual year and at a time when our connections are so necessary and sustaining. And thank you, Donna and Susan and Jo, for being with us today and being panelists. I'm really looking forward to our conversation together. So I'm going to introduce each of you, and then I have a handful of questions for all of us, and we'll be off and running. So I'm going to begin with, we'll do this alphabetically. Donna Keel Armer has traveled extensively in North America, Europe, and Africa, but it was her first trip to Italy where she fell in love with the country and its people. It became what she called her heart place, and she made it her mission to return as often as possible. Her memoir, Solo in Salento, a memoir, tells the story of her sojourn in Otranto, Italy. I'm going to ask her to tell us more about that in a few minutes. Donna and her husband Ray live here in Beaufort, South Carolina, where she loves volunteering at the Pat Conroy Center and Hunting Island State Park. And you can find out more about Donna and her work at her website, donnaarmer.com. Jo Palmer has come all the way from Florida as an award-winning former newspaper reporter and longtime columnist whose folksy column, Cup of Joe, ran for 10 years in the Fernandino Beach News Leader with a large and enthusiastic following. He's written investigative reporting and feature stories, and that experience led to a 20-year career as an investigator for the Federal Public Defender's Office. And he's a sailor. He got the idea for his debut novel while working on an antique sailboat that he and his wife painstakingly restored. His new novel is called A Mariner's Tale, and you can learn more about him at his website, jopalmerauthor.com. Susan Diamond Riley is the author of the Delta and Jack's mystery series, The Sea Island's Secret and the Sea Turtle's Curse. Susan is an award-winning author and editor. She's worked in publishing, journalism, and education for more than 30 years and has taught and tutored writing at the middle school, high school, and college levels. She holds a Master of Arts degree in children's literature and is a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, the South Carolina Writers Association, and the Island Writers Network. And you can learn more about Susan at susandiamondriley.com. Okay, that's the formal stuff, y'all. So the four of us know one another and have several things in common. We all met in various ways through the Conroy Center. Susan and I met at the inaugural Conroy Writers Retreat.
That's right.
In 2018. Joe and I met at one of the festivals.
I think it was the second.
I think so. And Donna and I met because we were both volunteering at the Conroy Center. And so we shared that with one another. We also share kind of our common geography on the planet. We're all southern and coastal, and three of us quite close together, but you know, you're 2 hours away, right? pretty close. We all have a deep love of stories, and it happens that we currently are sharing the same publisher. We haven't all exclusively published, but we have published with Kohler Books out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. So we have a lot to share and a lot to discuss today. I'd like to begin by asking Susan, and then I'm going to ask you all the same question. Tell us about your most current book, a little bit about how you came to that story, and what you'd like for us to know about it.
Very good. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the author of the Delton Jacks Mystery Series, which is a series for middle grade students primarily, although I find that I have as many adult readers that are enjoying it as kids, but it was primarily written for middle school age kids and upper elementary. The first book was The Sea Island Secret, and it was published about 1.5 years ago. And then my newest book is The Sea Turtle's Curse. And both of the books are about a sibling pair, Delta and Jax from Chicago, who come to the Lowcountry to spend the summer with their grandparents. And while they're down here, they encounter some excitement that they never expected. In the first book, they discover a skeleton in the salt marsh and a message in a bottle that has been hidden away since the time of the Civil War. And so it sends them on a hunt to solve a mystery from about 150 years ago. In the second book, The Sea Turtle's Curse, the kids find an ancient carving of a sea turtle in the sand on the beach. And at first they think they found a treasure until everything starts going wrong and they realize maybe they're under a curse. And the magic involved in this relic that they found enables them to travel back through time. And they start seeing the area around here, around the Lowcountry, as it was about 500 years ago during the time that Native Americans and Spanish explorers were calling this place home. So as you can tell, there's a theme running through my books, and it's about history, American history, but I like to focus on parts of history that maybe have been forgotten or that most people don't know about, because there's a lot of history in the Lowcountry and it needs to be shared.
It really does. And there's a lot of layers of deep history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting that you said that adults enjoy these books that you write for children. You asked me to read this most recent book for an endorsement, and I found myself thinking, oh, my grandchildren would love this. And then I was loving it myself and reading it for the mystery. So it's timeless in that way, ageless, I suppose. So thank you. Thank you for that. Donna, your book is a very personal story. So tell us a little bit about how you came to this one and what you'd like for us to know about your story.
Well, first of all, and it's probably something I hate to admit, that my book is based on a lie.
On a lie.
On a lie. And I had no intention of writing a book about this experience, although when I decided that I needed to go off by myself, and there are various reasons why I did, some of just being at a point in my life where a lot of issues had come together at one time. And I thought, oh man, it's one of those days when I want to get in the car and drive off into the sunset. Instead, I chose to get on a plane and fly to Italy. But in order to do that, I had to lay all this groundwork. Tell my husband I really needed to go by myself because I wanted to do all this research because I was considering writing a historical novel. My friends, my family, all of whom kept saying to me, oh, how can you do this? How can you leave Ray for all this time and go tooting off? And I don't think this is the right thing to do. But nevertheless, I did. And when I came home, there were a lot of other extenuating circumstances that put any kind of writing on hold. And when I finally got back to writing, I started on the premise of writing a historical novel about Pantaleone's mosaic floor in the big cathedral there that was designed in 1163. And then I kind of got sidetracked. I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll write about the massacre of 1480, where 800 men were decapitated in this little town of Otranto. But somehow my story kept bubbling up. And then a dear close friend said to me, Donna, we all want to know about that experience. We want to live that experience through you. We may never get up whatever it takes to travel off by ourselves, but we want to know your story.
And that was my experience of reading your book. It made me want to get on the plane and go to Italy and have that kind of that solo adventure that's so self-illuminating. And you did that so beautifully for us.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Joe, you were working on a sailboat.
Yes.
And a story emerged.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in 2012, just as I was retiring, my wife and I found this old abandoned, basically an antique sailboat in a boatyard that had a $1,500 delinquent slip fee on it. And the gentleman didn't want to pay it. So we handed the title over to the marina owner and just walked. And I was looking at it one day and just something about it struck me. And I called my wife and she came down. Pam's used to me going off on tangents. So she came down and she looked at it and she looked at it. She goes, wow, there's something. It has a flat deck. I can lie out on it and get some sun. And she goes, it's a mess. And I said, yeah. She goes, we can do this. So I began the process of rebuilding that boat. And I had it in the yard one day. I learned a lot about working on boats from this old guy who resembled my brother. And the lead character in my book is loosely based on my recollections, my memories of him. And he taught me how to do everything. I'm not handy, I'm a writer, I always have been. So, but he taught me how to lay up fiberglass and how to roll and tip a paint job. And there was a hole in the cabin wall I was repairing one day, and it was about 104 degrees in the sun, and I was hot and sweaty, and the fiberglass wasn't cooperating, as it won't when it's too hot. And so finally, in frustration, I sat down, I pulled out my Gatorade, I turned on the Bluetooth, and I like Mark Knopfler, the recording artist, and I was listening to a song by Mark Knopfler called In the Sky. And it's about an old man who built his own sailboat and sailed all over the world. And of course, at the end of the song, he's old and deaf and decrepit. And there's a beautiful line that he's standing around the fire where a poet's dreams roast. And a vagabond wind whispered over the bay, the sounds and the laughter were carried away. And it hit me. I know what I want to write about. I want to build a story about an old man who built his boat and just goes, but something's got to happen to this guy. I can't just make the whole book about sailing because only then sailors will want to read it. So I built this story sort of just piecemeal as I went along. And the original title was Vagabond Wind.
I remember talking with you early on about that.
Yeah, and when Marley Russoff we've been friends for a long time, and she was giving me lots of guidance on it. And she called me one day and said, Joe, this title doesn't work. It's a beautiful title, but it doesn't work. It doesn't capture the whole arc of the story. And it became A Mariner's Tale. And it's about a troubled boy, 18-year-old kid who commits a wrong against this man. The old guy is very forgiving of nature. He sees a troubled kid in this. And so he talks the sheriff and the judge, releasing him, and he becomes his mentor. So that's the story.
It's a fabulous story. It's a wonderful story. And I hope the people that are watching us on Facebook or Zoom will pick up each of these books and take a look at them because they're all just really, really special stories.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you've always been a writer.
Yes.
And I know, Susan, that your degrees in creative writing. That's not the case for you and I, right?
Right.
So, so I'm curious for the non-writer first. When did you know you wanted to write, and how did that emerge for you?
The interesting thing is I knew at 7 that I wanted to write. I did it then. My mother gave me one of those fake red leather diary things, and I knew the moment she put it in my hands, had that little lock and key on it, that my heart just raced, and I was like so thrilled, and I kept that. Every page was covered. But then, my life just went on, and I did a million other things. And it wasn't until I retired like 15 years ago that it came to me again, and I began to write magazine articles for local magazines. And that was sort of the starting point for me to know I wanted to do more than 750 words. I wanted to put a lot of things on paper. However, it wasn't until this personal experience that I knew, that I felt inside that this is what I wanted to do, and I had to do it. It
That
wasn't,
particular story.
yeah, I had to do this. And now the stories are just bubbling up.
Right. Yeah, you unleashed the
Yes.
genie, right?
Yes.
That's great. That's wonderful. Now, Joe, you and Susan both have the journalism background and the creative writing experience. So we've all kind of come into it from kind of different pathways, perhaps. But I'm curious about your processes, each of our processes. And we've talked some about the variations in those. Tell us a little bit, Susan, about how you go about creating a story. And yours are mysteries, so that's
mine are
unique
mysteries
aspect.
and
children's stories.
right.
Okay.
And over the years, I've done a lot of I've done a lot of marketing writing and journalistic writing and other types of things where my technique would have been different. But with the mystery books, and I don't know that this varies because it's for children, but I find that because there's so much emphasis on the plot, and I do try to develop the characters as well, but with any mystery, I think there's so much importance to the plot and to the smallest details of the plot that I do a lot of outlining before I ever sit down to the computer and start writing chapter 1. And so I first come up with the germs of the ideas, and because mine are historical mysteries, I have to do a lot of historical research as well. And because place is so important to my books, I do a lot of location scouting, so to speak, to make sure that my descriptions of the Lowcountry places are real and are going to be real to the reader. But I find that once I have that basic research done, I outline the plot extensively, and I keep working with that and fooling with it. Like some people would sit down and do all that in the process of the writing. I do it ahead of time because I want all of the clues that are going to come forward in my mystery. I want them spaced appropriately in the book. And I usually have a couple of red herrings that are throwing the reader off. And so I like to have those included. And the historical information, I want to have that spread out in such a way that it isn't just an information dump to the reader, because that can be a turnoff, especially to young readers. They don't want it to be so obvious that they're reading a book that might be educational. So I have to try to spread that out, and I want to make sure characters are showing up in the right places. So I get that all outlined extensively. And right now, I'm working on my next book, and I have about a 15-page synopsis written. And so I'll get a synopsis written. But until I feel like it's completely in my head, I know exactly what's going to happen in that book, I don't really sit down and start writing chapter 1. But once I do, I edit it as I go. I am probably an editor first and an author second. I do a lot of editing and have for decades of other people's works. And so I do that to myself as well. And then I have other authors that I know are that I can count on and whose I trust to give me honest feedback. So I do have them do that as I'm writing, a couple chapters at a time. But by the time I get through to the end and my those trusted readers have read and given me their feedback, I'm pretty much ready to go. I don't go through multiple drafts of an entire manuscript.
That's that is so appealing.
Wow, look
So
at you.
I'm
That's so
like,
funny. I've had so many people tell me that they could never write that way. It's too.
Well, I mean, it's so detailed and so there's complexity to it that's essential for the mystery.
Yes.
But it's so, I mean, it just sounds wonderful to be able to write at the end and you're really done.
You are, but I
That's
think
lovely.
what people don't keep in mind, because, I can, it might not take me as long once I'm typing to get to that end,
Mhm.
but I've maybe spent 6-8 months doing all that other part. And that's part of the writing process too.
Right.
There's a lot more to writing a book, especially a book that has factual information in it, than just sitting down and writing off the top of your head. And I'm sure that all of you here would agree that there's more. You've got to find some factual information, whether even if it's not a historical mystery. You want reality in your
Mhm.
book. You want it to feel real to your readers. And so I'm just doing it in a different order than some people do. Instead of doing it all at the same time, I do that part up front and then do the other. It works for me.
And you said sort of maybe an 8 or 9 month process. Do you complete a book in a year? Is that more or less?
Well, the first book that I wrote, I started that as my master's thesis
Mhm.
project. And so that was kind of spread out because I started it in a particular class. And then a year later, I had to do a little more of it for my proposal for my master's thesis. And then I completed that draft for, to turn in as my master's thesis. And so that was different. It was artificially spread out. The second book happened much faster because I probably spent about 4 or 5 months doing the research. And then I wrote the book in about 3 months. So
That's great,
the whole thing was written in between 6 and 8 months.
I wish for that too.
So,
Wow.
but I've already spent that length of time researching the next book.
Right.
So, I've
Right.
blown my schedule right there. So
Well, and it's different for everyone.
that's
and,
right. It happens as it
You
happens.
know, what emerges takes the time it needs to emerge. Right.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about writing for children.
Well, I feel very strongly that children's literature is not for children only. I don't feel that there's any upper cap to that. When my first book came out, I had a lady I knew who had purchased a copy and given it to her mother.
Mhm.
And her mother is 103 and she loved the book. And so when people say, what's the reading range for your book? I say, well, it's from age 8 to 103 apparently. Because I think a well-written children's book can be enjoyable by people of all ages above that range. But having said that, what makes it a children's book and not an adult book is that it has to be accessible to the kids of a certain age. And I don't typically write for children. Until I started writing the series, very little of what I had written had been for children and had all been for adults. But I'd always had a great love of children's books, and I had always read them on my own just for fun anyway. So I always had a dream of doing that. But I think what I have found is different. Of course, if you want to keep it clean, you're not going to have anything too racy in a children's book, which is part of why I enjoy writing that, because I don't enjoy reading racier things, and so I don't want to write them. But also, I found from speaking to middle school teachers and principals that what they've asked for is they want you have to be careful not to write down to the children. So you don't want too much vocabulary that the kids can't understand, but it's okay to have a little bit. So that if they have to look up a word that they don't know, then that's great. The chapters need to be short, and you've got to catch them quickly in that first couple of pages, because too many kids don't enjoy reading. And so you have to catch them quickly, especially in a mystery book. Every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. And when I do readings for adults, they always get a kick out of that. They think that's such a funny gimmick, but it's almost required when you're writing for kids, because otherwise they're going to put that book down and won't feel compelled maybe to keep reading. So those are some of the things that I've adapted. I was at a conference and they were saying a way to think of it as a writer is say a mystery novel in particular. So it's more direct comparison. A mystery novel for an adult is like a season of a TV series. Say you're watching, CSI or something, and there's some overarching story that's going on for the season. That adult book is going to be a season of a TV show. When you're writing a children's book, that's going to be an episode of the season. And so you can't drag it out. You can't make it so complex. Of course, there's exceptions. Harry Potter, 800-page book or something. There are exceptions to every rule. But in general, for the age group that I write, you want to have it complex enough that the kids are going to be challenged by it. And I personally like to make it complex enough that adults are going to enjoy reading it too. But you got to keep in mind that it's primarily got to be something that a 10 or 12-year-old is going to identify with, which also is something that I have to do with mine, is I always have middle school teachers read them before I submit them to a publisher to make sure that the vocabulary is real, the dialogue is real, and that doesn't sound stilted. When kids read it, they need to feel like, yes, this is a conversation I might have with a friend.
Really authentic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. Thanks for that. So a completely different sort of approach in writing is a memoir, which is personal and is intimate. I mean, there's a lot of self-revelation, right? You're sort of showing yourself to the whole world. So tell us a little bit about your process of writing, but also what it was like to sort of open your heart that way. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. I'd love to hear what that was like for you.
Difficult. It's very difficult. The easy part of the book for me is I lived the story. And when I took off, I had a few very close friends who said to me, don't leave us high and dry, send us some emails, tell us you're okay, tell us what you're doing. So I had a nice series of letters that I had gone back and forth with and photographs about the experience. So that made writing the bulk of the book fairly easy. But I hired a developmental editor, and she said to me, this is a beautiful story, but you are a narrator standing outside of your own story. So you have to go back and you have to write yourself into the story. You have to give the reasons why you were compelled to do this. So it's a self-discovery, and I went there to Otranto for self-discovery, but writing the book was, again, even digging deeper into the innermost being of myself and admitting to myself the things I needed to admit to myself in order to find my own voice again. The thing is, now I'm writing a mystery. I've been listening really hard to what Susan was saying. And the irony is, because I don't have all that beautiful discipline that you have, I write. Joe and I maybe have more in common. I write endlessly. I do tons of information dumping. And then that's how I come to know my characters and the plot and what's going to happen. And then I start going back. But the other thing I do, even before I start writing, is I read the genre I'm writing about. So I have just been saturated in these wonderful mystery stories, a lot of international ones, because my book, again, this book takes place in Italy also. But it's also, the main character is based on the last part of my career, which my husband and I owned a restaurant and a catering business and a bed and breakfast. So the main character is a chef and has been working hard to save her money to go to go to Italy and work in a restaurant there for a year. So that's how the book starts. The interesting thing for me is I knew how it started and I immediately knew how it would end. And now I'm writing all the middle parts with all those red herrings and plot twists and everything. So I will write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And simultaneously, I'm also working on this. The mystery is called La Stella Rossa del Mare, the red starfish. And then I'm also writing a second travel book, which is called The Night of Andrea Bocelli. So I'm kind of juggling some things now and trying to promote this book. And it's just a wonderful world. And one of the other things that I wanted to say is the support of the writing community, other authors, to me has been invaluable with showing me the ropes and teaching me where to go for research or sources. So I've been absolutely thrilled with the interaction with the other authors in our community.
You know, it's such a solitary craft, but we
Yes.
need each other.
Yes,
You
we
know,
do.
need
Yes.
the connections and the experience and wisdom of others, and the, people that'll flourish, wave the flag, don't go there.
Right, don't do that. Don't do
Listen
that.
to Susan. Yeah.
Or sometimes somebody who will wave the flag and say, do go there, but
Yes.
you're
If you're
giving up.
right.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're hesitant to have
Yes.
somebody say, I
Right.
think you're onto something, run with it.
Right. Those
Yeah.
things are really, really critical. So Joe, I want to give you a chance to talk about your writing process, but while we're talking about this sort of sense of community, and I'll let you dive in here first. You've been coming to the Conroy Festival since the inception.
The very first.
So that signals to me that you're finding something in a festival like this that helps you with your work.
Yes.
Can you name what that is? What the benefits of a gathering like this have meant for you?
The theme of the very first Pat Conroy Literary Festival was places, character, and muse. And that just drew me right in because I don't have, you're self-disciplined. I wish I did. But I knew when I started writing this book where I wanted to go with it. But being a sailor, I know you can't just get from point A to point B. You have to tack starboard or port, and sometimes you have to jibe and go backwards a little bit. So I knew when I started writing this, I knew where I wanted to go, but I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. And so, but I do a lot of research. My journalism background and my investigative background have taught me how to do the research. But then everything else in between, of course, is, you got to have some fact in there. You can't all be artistic license, can it?
Right.
But
Well, it has to be believable.
it
right?
has to be believable.
You have to ground it in something.
Yeah, you can't use a nautical term that's incorrect because the average reader may say, okay, but somebody who's a sailor reads it, they're going to send you a nasty email or write a bad Amazon review or something. But that, but starting back when I was a kid, I didn't have any more discipline then. I'm just an undisciplined person. I'm just going to admit it. And I was the kid who sat in the classrooms taught by nuns who were uber disciplined, who stared out the window and had imaginary friends and, thought stories in my head. And this went on until I was in high school. And I had a creative writing teacher who just inspired me. I had her had her senior English class. In the second half of the year, she taught creative writing. And I was just enthralled by her. I mean, most of the teenage guys, were, she was beautiful. But there was just something about her, she was very young. She was probably only 5 years older than the oldest kid in the classroom. She was fresh out of teaching school. And I remember she came to the first day of creative writing class, she told us what everything was going to be. And then the next day we came in and she said, everybody take out a piece of paper and make up a story. Well, everybody except myself and a couple of other people just sat there like deer in the headlights. And well, that was easy. I said, I can do this. So I just made something up and turned it in. And the next day when class was dismissed, she told me to stay after class. And I thought, oh boy, I'm busted because I didn't chew gum. But she came over to me and she had my paper in her hand and she handed it to me and it had an A on it. And she said, "You have a gift. Use it, grow it." And that's what I did, you know, all the way, even when I was a newspaper reporter. When I wrote hard news stories, I wrote stories. You know, people have stories to tell. When I wrote my investigative report, I remember a lawyer coming into my office one day with a report in my hand. He goes, "You know, I like reading your reports as much for the stories as the information that's in it." But so that's what I came around to that. And when I started coming to the conferences, it was quite by coincidence because I'd gone on Pat Conroy's Facebook page when he announced that he had cancer. And I wrote him a note. I remember saying, "Pat Conroy's bigger than cancer. You got this. And you're not leaving without that next novel anyway." And then within a month or so, he was dead. And it was on July 4th, 2015, I think it was. My wife and I were on our boat with the kids and a friend was coming down to meet us and I heard the ping on my phone and I thought he was lost. And I opened it up and it was Pat Conroy's Facebook page with his profile on it. I thought he'd been hacked. And I was afraid to open it. And when I finally did, it was a message from somebody said, "Oh, my name is Claudia. I was Pat's." Well, to make a long story short, it wasn't Claudia. It was Mihai. And he wanted to know if I wanted to use he liked what I wrote and he wanted to know if I'd use my social media platform to help promote the center. And I started coming to the meetings. And I think Bryn McLean was the first instructor I had in a meeting. And then I had Stephanie Austin Edwards, who was the person who introduced me to Judy Kurtz Goldman, who was my line editor for the book. And she gave me the discipline that I needed to finish it. I had the story down, but I needed to do some work on it.
So the connections really helped with the process.
They did.
For you.
The connections did. Yeah, I had plenty of,
That's really
I had people here, Mary Green, Tim Conroy, Kathy, Cassandra. I mean, I had all these great people reading it and giving me feedback. And in addition, I had two friends from grammar school who I could trust, whose judgment I could trust. One of them is an indie movie producer in New York. And, she's got the New York attitude. And she would send me emails that said, "Oh my God, I fell in love with this line." And the very next one I got back from her would be a little emoji going, "Ah." So
honest feedback.
Honest feedback. But you gotta have that,
Right.
You have to have that.
Right. It really does take that. So now that we've all gone through some of that process and a lot of it in some cases, I'm sure there are people that are listening in this afternoon wondering, like, I just need those nuggets of advice. I need that encouragement. So what are maybe a couple of things that you would say to someone who's got a story inside or a itch to write, whatever it is they're writing? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, if they're just starting out writing, I would encourage them to find a writing group. Because as you say, you can learn so much from people that have been there. You can get encouragement. You can find other people to read your book. They might have connections for editors if you're going to need an editor. And I think trying to do it alone as a first timer would be so much more difficult. So I think finding a community would be the first thing. And second of all, when they're getting ready to publish or to seek a publisher, I would urge them to look into every possibility, because when I first started looking for a publisher for my first book, I knew that there were the big publishers in New York City, and you needed an agent to get those. And then I knew you could self-publish. I didn't realize there was anything in between. And I found that it was difficult to get an agent sometimes, an agent that had any influence, if you hadn't already published something, ironically. And I had published newspaper articles and marketing catalogs and that sort of thing, but I'd never published a novel before. And that was going to make it a much longer process than what I wanted. So I didn't think that probably was a route that worked for me. At that time, I wasn't interested in self-publishing because I was really looking for the validation of having a publisher say they wanted to publish my book. That was just a bucket list item for me. And at the time, I didn't realize there were other options out there. And so through talking to some other published authors who I had met through some of these writing groups, I discovered that there's a world of smaller presses out there that are willing to take unsolicited manuscripts. And sometimes there's time frames. Maybe they don't take them all the time, but they'll have a couple months a year that you can do that. And that there were those options, and there were hybrid publishing options where maybe you pay a little bit, but then they still provide all the services, and they provide a lot of money on their end to help. And one of my hesitations in publishing with the smaller press was I thought, oh, but then they're not going to go out and sell my book. I'm going to have to do more of my own marketing. But the more I talked to some big name published authors who were published with those big presses, I realized it doesn't matter who you are or who you publish with, you got to sell your own book.
We all have to work really hard.
Yeah, that's a big part of it I didn't realize. So that shouldn't make the difference for you, because no matter whether you self-publish or you publish with Random House, everybody's going to expect that you get out there and market your own book and put a lot of effort into selling your own book. And so that's just par for the course to do that. So a new author needs to understand that too, and be up for the chore, because sometimes the skills that it takes to write a book don't necessarily translate into the skills to sell a book.
Right. The business side of
right. It's a whole, and you might need to hire other people to do some of those things for you.
Right. Yeah,
publicists or business managers or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Joe, what would your advice be for someone itching to write their story?
The first thing I ask a person who tells me, and now I have people that do that, and they say, well, golly, how did you do this? The first thing I ask them is if they got a story to tell. What's the story you want to tell? And then they'll just start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then I'll tell them, you're already writing that story. Right. What you need to do, of course, you got to put your tail in the chair, but what you need to do is to just tell the story. Think about you're telling your mom or your dad or your wife or your husband or your sister, whomever, just tell them the story. And as you go along, the pieces start to come together. But while you're doing that, of course, you have to do the nuts and the bolts stuff. You have to have a little bit of discipline anyway. And I also will tell them if there are writing groups available, because there aren't everywhere. Sometimes you have to start your own to get involved and to pick, your mama's going to tell you she loves your book no matter how bad it is. Your spouse, if she's like mine, doesn't mind telling you it stinks or that she loves it. So I pick readers from the very beginning. For instance, Martha Monroe Vion and Monica Tidwell, who I've known since grammar school. They started reading over my shoulder with this book chapter by chapter from chapter 1. Martha her husband was into publish. He was a newspaper publisher. She wrote stories. Martha raises Pasofino horses. So she's always been into the horse stuff. And she did magazine articles for equine magazines and stuff. So she has a lot of discipline writing. You got to do that for newspapers and magazines. And I got a lot of insight from her. And then Monica, being the film producer, she had the picture, the pieces where the cinematography is. And she would share her thoughts about doing that. So that's what I tell people. I said, sit down. One of the things that Monica told me about one time is she goes, it's like going to a movie, just sit back and look and say, that's what I want to do. I want to tell that story. Mm-hmm. But again, you gotta sit in the chair and do it. Right. You just got to do it. I mean, that's the best advice I give people is sit down in your chair and get it done. You got that story to tell, just tell it.
But I heard a podcast, I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert not too long ago, who said, you have to stop not writing.
Yes.
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 You have to do that part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Donna? What would
Well,
you advise?
I agree with Susan on finding the community.
Mhm.
And that's really how I came to write my book. I joined a group called the Sea Island Spirit Writers. And you're required when you go to, well, this particular writing group, you're required to take something you've written and you have to read it and you are critiqued by the other members of the group. Well, I was petrified. I mean, I just thought, this is my worst nightmare. But as it turned out, I wrote the essay I wrote was called The Last Supper. And it was really about the last night that I had spent in Otranto. And I read that to the group and they immediately said, you need to write a book about this. And that chapter that I read them is chapter 45 in my book. But the support that kind of group gives you, it's a very objective group that, I did not know a single person in this group. I had met the mentor of the group one time. So they were very objective and they're very well read and published and in various stages of writing. So I agree with Susan, that's a great thing. The other thing that I did, because I didn't have a journalistic writing backgrounds, is I attended classes. The South Carolina Writers Association puts on marvelous classes. I've attended Susan's classes. You did a class last year in Bluffton. I did that. Jonathan Huff, the executive director of the Pat Conroy Center. I've listened to just about everything he's had to say, and he has such valuable information. So it's putting yourself in these positions so that I could learn. The other thing I learned by being a docent at the Pat Conroy Literary Center is that Pat paid it forward.
Mhm.
And if I don't do anything else in my writing life, it's always to reach out and extend a hand to someone else who's saying, I have a story to tell. And it's a beautiful gift to receive and to give.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you named that. My own experience is kind of different from each of yours. And I discovered that I needed to read a lot to learn how to write. And you mentioned, you read memoirs, you read mysteries. And I guess is intuitive, but it wasn't to me immediately when I wanted to write a story. But it makes me curious now, what's everyone reading right now? What's your top of the nightstand read these days?
Well, I do a lot of reading of children's and young adult books, just to stay in the in that tone of language and dialogue. Right now, actually, on my nightstand is a mystery that my brother and sister-in-law just published, and that I don't know that I can take any credit for that, but they had been saying for a long time they'd like to write a book, and I, of course, encouraged them to do that. And so that was just published a few weeks ago. And so that's on my nightstand right now. Yeah.
That's fun. Joe, what are you reading now?
Right now I'm trying to get my book on the market. I haven't had a whole lot of time, but I have a friend, he and I were corpsmen together in the Navy, and he just retired as an ER doc up here in South Carolina. And we were talking about books the other day. And I asked him if he had ever read Mitch Albon's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven.
Right.
And I've read it 2 or 3 times. And as soon as I said that, I thought, I got to read that again. So that's what I'm reading.
There you go. Donna, what about you?
Well, I'm reading mysteries since that's what I'm knee deep in writing now. And I'm reading all over the board with mysteries. I'm not just looking at contemporary mysteries, which mine is. And I'm currently reading a series that is the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt mystery series, and it's out of Victorian England. And it's very interesting. I love the research. Everything is so meticulous about the culture, the mores, all the intricacies that were going on in the social scene, and then all the undercurrents. So it gives me a good feel. But that's what I'm doing. I've read some wonderful Asian mysteries, Italian, French. So I'm just kind of all
That's
over the
fun.
board, just immersing myself in these wonderful stories.
That's great. That's a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Good, good. We just got a signal from Holland that we have some questions from our viewers. Is that right?
We have a couple.
Okay.
So the first one, this one was actually asked twice, but it's generally along the lines of how has the pandemic affected your creativity and writing, and has there been a silver lining?
Well,
Yes.
who wants to jump in there first?
I don't mind starting that because I'm an introvert, and the pandemic has a silver lining because I haven't had to do as many promotional things as you would normally. And I know it's not a good thing, but it's kind of a relief. The thing, writing requires that you are motivated. You have the desire. I think anything does. It doesn't just have to be writing, but it has to be this internal desire that is pushing you to do this. So if I allow myself, if I have a day when I feel like this virus is, and the state of the union and all the things that have gone on lately is just overwhelming, then I'm out. I'm going to walk under these amazing oaks and Spanish moss that we have here, and walk by the water and see all the beauty in this part of our world. So there, I've taken it as good, positive, making whatever is negative about the virus, trying to help where I can help, making sure I'm masked and socially distanced and all those things. But it's also had that silver lining for me.
Yeah, we're good.
Mhm.
Good.
It's funny that you say that as your positive, because I was going to say the negative side has been I had a full calendar of marketing events scheduled.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I do is I speak to larger groups and I do school visits. And so all of those were canceled. I've been able to do some virtually, but it isn't the same.
No.
But then the positive side for me has been, as an editor, I have had more editing business than I know what to do with through this virus, because people were at home cocooning and maybe they were getting around to writing that book that they'd always wanted to write, or or getting back to maybe something they'd started. Suddenly we all had a little bit of extra time to take on a hobby, so to speak, although for some of these people it's more than that. But for most of the people I've been editing with, writing is not their primary thing. But during Corona, they have had the time to do it. And so I've gotten a lot of editing jobs, some developmental, some more line edits. So that's been taking a larger proportion of my time and my life. So I have to make sure that I don't prioritize that. I have to make time for my own writing as well. But that's a positive. I think we can all find some kind of positive.
Great, good. And we'll be back to in person someday. Someday. Joe, what about you? What's
I guess
affected you?
the positive side is having to rediscover ways, to live again. And one of the positives for me is simplicity. I started riding a bicycle again. I need to ride a bicycle. I started getting out more. I mean, I quit staying in the house, sitting at my computer desk all day long, wasting time on Facebook and stuff, spending more time, with the family, quality time, doing simple things. I mean, just having family cookouts, things that are, sort of get lost in the shuffle of day-to-day living nowadays. The other thing, of course, trying to get a novel launched right now, it can be a little tricky, but I am stepping outside that. I'm looking for things that I can do outside. For instance, on my October 25th book launch day, Sherry Stouch, my publicist, really wanted me to get something out there and do that, even though it was on a Sunday. So I do some acting in the one of the local theaters in town. And so I talked to the bookstore about doing a launch event. And I mentioned something about, the theater. And I talked to Jill at the theater about, because they built an outdoor stage now where they can do their performances. We did Jesus Christ Superstar outdoors, and it was so much fun. So I talked with Jill Dillingham, the Playhouse owner, about it. And I said, I want to do some readings here, on the stage. The book, Story and Song Bookstore said they wanted to co-host it. They would sell the books. And she goes, well, instead of you just sitting up there doing readings, I got a great idea. And I said, okay, let's hear it. How about we pick actors? You pick the main characters out of the book, and then we'll assign assign an actor for each one of those characters. And I thought, Jesus. So I called Sherry and told her about it, and she goes, whose idea was that? That's awesome. So we went with that. I picked 6 characters, one of whom does a bang up Irish accent. Of course, part of my book takes place in Ireland, and I went there to do the research on it, and I have a lot of Irish friends who helped me keep it authentic. But we ended up doing it on stage, and of course, we did more of the presentation that you would normally do with just a reading, but they just got into the acting, and everybody was thrilled. And the troubled kid, in the book, who gets this whole story going by vandalizing this sailboat this old man's building, he was perfect for the part.
Excellent.
And I went to him. His name is Joseph Woodley, and I've watched Joseph grow in the 5 years I've been affiliated with the theater, from a 12-year-old kid to an 18-year-old kid. But he's perfect for the part of Doug Eliezer, the troubled kid in the story. He's got that whole punky attitude thing going on. And so I said, he's got to do Doug. And so I gave it to him, and I said, now let me tell you something. He's a nasty character in that first. You got to do nasty. He goes, I can do that. And I said, I know you can. And I said, but the other thing is he drops a couple of F-bombs in that first chapter. And I said, so if you're not comfortable with that, just use another word. Oh, I can do that. My mom gets on to me about F-bombs all the time. So it turned out great. It was like going to theater.
So it pushed you to a more creative approach than you would have done otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And of course, I got more into my writing again. I wanted to start on another novel that's been going in my head for many, many years. I stayed away from it for the longest time because it took me back to a very troubled past when I was a kid. But it's called Of Locusts and Wild Honey, and I'm loving it. I just love it. I think I love it better than this one.
Well, you just segued into my next question, which is what you're working on next. So you've got that bubbling and brewing.
Yeah.
Donna, you have a mystery.
Yes, yeah.
In the works,
Yes.
along with your other piece. You've got 2 pots stirring.
Two pots stirring. The mystery will come to the top of the pot first. And like I said, the title is in Italian, but the translation is The Red Starfish. And again, it takes place in Italy because, again, I love Italy. But it does start off in the Lowcountry.
Okay.
So
Okay, good. Well, place matters.
Place matters. It's a
Right.
character. Place is, for me, is always a character.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've got another one.
Yes,
cooking.
I'm working on the next Delta and Jack's mystery. And in this next one, they're going to be exploring some Revolutionary War history. All of my books take place in the present day, but in some magical way or the other, they actually connect with the past. And in this next one, it'll be the Revolutionary War era in this part of the country, including Francis Marion, who was the swamp fox.
Yeah. Wow.
So they're going to be exploring that. In each of the books, they're dealing with some kind of crisis in the present day, but in order to deal with that, they have to deal with some kind of mystery from the past first. So
That'll be fun.
looking forward to it.
Holland, did you have another question off the?
Sure.
I had a feeling you did.
Yes, ma'am. So we have one in here. And then if we have time, there's one more. But the question is, were you inspired to write your book because of a setting, or did you visit that place because you wanted to write about it? And this is super relevant.
That's really bringing us to what we were
saw
just
that.
talking about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So So I'm going to throw my own in here. I discovered the story that I wrote about on a visit here and then came to write the story. Other stories emerge different ways. So what about you all? Did the story start?
I started writing the story when I lived in Charlotte with my first book, and it took place in Hilton Head because I was looking for a kind of idyllic area where you wouldn't expect something nefarious to happen. But through the research that I was doing to write the book, I spent more and more time, and I fell in love with this part of the country. And so by the time I finished writing it, we still lived in Charlotte, but by the time it was published, we lived full time in Hilton Head.
It brought you to your new home.
It did.
And we're grateful for that.
We're out of time.
Joe?
Living in the setting for the story. I mean, it's like the Lowcountry where I live is like the tail end of the Lowcountry. We're in Northeast Florida. We actually had, back a long time ago, there were Gullah people as far down as Amelia Island. And so there's a community there called American Beach, which is in the story, although I call it something a little different, where there were Gullah people. And some of their descendants are still there. There were some really, really old people, and most of them are dead now, but you could still hear that in their voice. But it was the setting, I just worship it. I mean, I'll just go out to the bluff and watch the sunset over the marsh. And every time I look at that Spartina grass, I see something different. Ham says, "Why do you make so many sunset pictures?" And I said, "Because everyone's different, And so it was the setting for me. And again, it was this song that it was like a jingle in my head. I remember going home that evening and telling Pam, "I got a story to tell, and I already know the title of it." So that was big inspiration.
It really came from the place.
It came from the place. And, I started reading, Pat Conroy's novels from The Water is Wide. And I always admired how when you read his stories, the place that was in the story was like another character in the story.
Right.
And I always loved the way he did that. And I always thought, if I have stories to tell, that's the way I want to tell them. And I also love that he wore his heart on his sleeve, because as a big sappy third generation Irish guy, I do too.
Just put it all
I'm a
out
soft
there.
touch. I just put it all out
Put it
there.
all out there. And Donna, your story, I mean, Italy really is, and the history is such a character in your story. When I got to the end of your book, I was afraid you were going to stay there.
So was my husband. He did not believe I was coming home until he saw me coming through that terminal and actually saw me there. He just said, "I didn't really think you would come back."
Yeah.
And it was hard because it is a place. I've been traveling there since 1995, and it is a place that just captured every emotion I had, maybe every emotion I was even afraid to share. Italy drew out of me. And the very first trip I made, I was standing on the side of the hill. It was time to leave, and I just started weeping. I did not want to leave. It was so powerful. And at that time, I thought, that's what place is. And it's also when I discovered that home is the place in your heart. You create it. You don't always get to pick and choose every place you live. So if you can pack it up and keep it with you, then it's always there. And the next two books I'm writing also take place in Italy.
Your heart place.
Right. And in particular, Puglia, which is a very obscure part of Italy. It's in the heel of the boot. It's more agriculture. It's not as populated. It's not driven by tourism so much. And it's a very special place with a very special history.
I can't wait to visit there through your story.
Thank you.
Italy's awesome. We spent a lot of time there when I was in the Navy. I totally agree with you. You can't not fall in love with Italy.
Well, and every place has stories that long to be told.
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
y'all, we've run out of time. We could talk all afternoon. And maybe we should continue that after we're off the air. But I want to thank each of you. Thank you for your time and your stories and bringing your heart to sharing those with all of us. Alan, thank you for your help and the work of the studio folks here. And I hope everyone who's watching with us on Zoom or YouTube or wherever you're watching, that you'll take a look at the books and learn more about these authors through them. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you, Becky. Thanks, Ms. Bynum.
Yeah, you're good.